The five-star restaurant, La Lumiere, was reserved for the city's elite. Ariana Vale, the formidable billionaire CEO, was dining with her son, Evan. Evan was withdrawn, terrified by the clink of cutlery. Ariana sighed, but Evan trembled harder. Suddenly, Evan knocked over a water glass. The crash echoed, drawing every eye. Ariana flushed. Evan was on the brink of tears. A waiter rushed over, harshly reprimanding the child. Then a single dad from a nearby table stood up. Daniel Ross. He walked to them, shielding Evan. Daniel spoke softly but firmly. "The boy did nothing wrong. You are frightening him." The dining room fell silent. Ariana stared at Daniel. The powerful CEO was utterly spent. Ariana Vale was the iron-willed head of Vale Enterprises, a global conglomerate that shaped markets and dictated economic trends. She was known for her ruthless efficiency, her diamond composure, and her ability to outmaneuver any rival. In public, she was the epitome of success, a corporate queen. Privately, she carried a heavy, invisible burden. She was a deeply lonely single mother whose greatest fear was that her own son did not love her. Evan, her heir, was born prematurely. He had endured a difficult first year, requiring lengthy and invasive hospital stays. From those early traumas, Evan developed two crippling conditions: severe hyperacusis, a condition where normal sounds are physically experienced as painfully loud, and acute social anxiety, which made him retreat from any unfamiliar face or unexpected noise. Ariana's solution to every problem was capital and expertise. She had a rotating staff of dozens, 3 full-time nannies, a private pediatric specialist flown in weekly, a sensory integration therapist, and tutors fluent in 3 languages. Yet Evan only grew more fragile, more afraid. He pushed away every paid expert, retreating further into a silent, solitary world built on mistrust. Ariana watched her son suffer, and her immense power felt utterly useless. Her entire life's work, building an empire to secure his future, had resulted in his isolation. The guilt was a constant, sharp ache beneath her tailored facade. Tonight's dinner was Ariana's final desperate attempt to normalize Evan. She chose La Lumiere for its aura of intense control and sophistication. Her logic was flawed, rooted in her corporate mindset. If she could expose Evan to a highly regulated, high-pressure environment, perhaps he would learn to adapt, to be strong. But the moment they were seated, the environment was catastrophic for Evan. The crystal chandeliers were blindingly bright. The chairs were too high, making him feel exposed. The constant, rhythmic, metallic clinking of cutlery on porcelain in the cavernous room was not just noise to him, it was a physical assault. Ariana tried to talk him through it, leaning in, her voice low. "You are Evan Vale, darling. You have nothing to fear. You must be strong." But the corporate mantra only made the boy flinch. His small body coiled with tension. As the tension peaked, his hand, already trembling, missed the rim of the water glass. The heavy crystal glass toppled and smashed onto the marble floor. The sound was shockingly loud. It was instantly followed by the deep, heavy silence of the shocked, wealthy patrons. Every head, the venture capitalists, the socialites, the politicians, turned to stare at the source of the interruption. Ariana's face burned a deep, mortifying red. Evan, convinced he had caused a disaster, let out a choked cry, covering his ears and shaking violently. He was beyond the point of reasoning. Then the confrontation began. The waiter, already stressed by the demanding environment, rushed over. He ignored Ariana entirely and directed his anger solely at the terrified child. "Young man, you must watch what you are doing. This is extremely costly crystal. You must learn some respect for your surroundings." Ariana's blood ran cold. She finally snapped out of her shock, ready to unleash the formidable wrath of a billionaire CEO on the offending employee. Her mouth opened, ready to command his immediate dismissal. But a different voice, calm, controlled, and utterly unexpected, cut her off before she could utter a single syllable. It was Daniel Ross. He had risen slowly from his simple table in the back, a man whose clothes were neat but clearly not expensive, a man whose quiet presence defied the sheer opulence of the room. He didn't rush. He walked with measured, deliberate steps until he stood directly between the furious waiter and the convulsing child. He effectively cut Evan off from the threat. Evan, instinctively recognizing a shield, immediately scrambled backward, pressing himself desperately against Daniel's worn but sturdy trousers. Daniel's eyes met Ariana's over the boy's head. They were eyes that held no fear of her status, no desire for her wealth, just a profound, protective sincerity. He looked down at the waiter, who was now gaping at the stranger's audacity. Daniel's voice, though quiet, carried an absolute authority that silenced the room more effectively than the crash of the glass. The boy did nothing wrong. You are frightening him with your volume and your anger? Step away. The waiter was stunned into silence. The entire room was paralyzed. The Billionaire's CEO, Ariana Vale, stood up, her flawless composure finally shattered, her mouth hanging slightly open. She looked at Daniel, a man she knew nothing about, and found herself utterly, completely incapable of speech. Her command center, her voice had been stolen by the raw simplicity of a stranger's kindness. Ariana, driven by the instinct to understand and contain, immediately acquired Daniel. She offered him and his 7-year-old daughter Lily a seat at her now chaotic table. She used her most imposing corporate tone to cover the tremor in her voice. Your intervention, Mr. Ross, was highly unusual. Are you trained in de-escalation? Daniel smiled easily. His smile was warm, unburdened, and entirely genuine. A bit of an outdated skill set, perhaps. I used to manage crisis intervention and emotional support at a specialized center for children with high sensory needs before I switched to technical work. Now I'm just a full-time father. Ariana absorbed the information. This was no coincidence. It was a tailor-made miracle. Lily, meanwhile, was already at work. She approached Evan slowly, sensing his fear. She didn't speak. She held out her worn, slightly lopsided stuffed rabbit, a counterpoint to the sterile perfection of La Lumiere. He helps me when the playground is too loud, Lily offered to Evan, her voice barely a whisper. He doesn't talk back. Evan, finding the small, soft toy non-threatening, slowly took it. He squeezed the rabbit tight against his chest, retreating slightly behind Daniel, but his eyes were noticeably less frantic. Ariana watched the two children. She had bought Evan the most expensive, educationally correct toys on the market, but he recoiled from them. Lily, with a simple, used fabric rabbit, had accomplished more in 2 minutes than Ariana's entire sensory therapy budget had in 2 years. The sight was a profound judgment on her life choices. The waiter returned, cautious now, placing a new plate of food carefully on the table. Evan jumped again, his hand flying back to Daniel's arm. Daniel immediately placed his other hand firmly on Evan's shoulder, a signal of constant, non-negotiable presence. He then signed his simple cue using his free hand. Steady! Evan saw the movement, felt the anchor of Daniel's touch, and slowly settled back into his seat. The small, silent interaction was a revelation. Ariana felt the burning sensation behind her eyes intensify. I've raised him for 6 years, Mr. Ross. 6 years, she choked out, her voice raw. I have never once, in a moment of pure panic, been able to ground him like that. He trusts you, a complete stranger, more than me, his own mother. Daniel's empathy was instantaneous. It is not a failure of love, Ariana. It is a failure of communication. Children like Evan don't need loud reassurance. They need quiet predictability. They need to know that the anchor in their life is not moving. Your corporate pressure, your drive, it's the opposite of predictability. It doesn't help him feel safe. Ariana felt a cold wave of realization. Her empire was built on maximizing efficiency and minimizing downtime. She had treated Evan's vulnerability as a bug to be patched, a productivity drain, instead of a heart to be nurtured. The immense pride she took in her control evaporated, replaced by hollow dread. Ariana turned her head away, tears finally spilling onto her perfectly contoured cheekbones. She wiped them away quickly, accustomed to hiding every weakness. She was the CEO who commanded respect, not the mother who wept. They continued to talk as Lily and Evan exchanged silent communication over the rabbit. Daniel spoke of his late wife and the devastation of sudden loss. He recounted the days when Lily was a toddler, deeply fearful of any medical setting. He didn't frame his story as a tragedy, but as a lesson, a period where he learned to slow down and truly listen to the unspoken fears of a child. This need for presence, he explained, was why he had abandoned his highly specialized, well-paid consultancy career for simple, flexible technical repair work. He chose time over wealth. She made a difficult confession. I have the money, the influence. I control the media, but I have no one left to tell me how to be a parent. I've isolated myself, Daniel. I have only employees, no friends, no partners. I tried to pay for expertise, but I failed to pay attention. Daniel looked at her, his expression lingering, penetrating the deep solitude she carried. You are not a failed mother, Ariana. You are a mother who was trained to be an unstoppable machine. It takes courage to break the programming. You don't need to be perfect immediately. You just need to be willing to be good. Ariana felt her cold corporate shell crack entirely. She was receiving the unconditional warmth she desperately craved, a kindness untainted by ambition or financial motive. The emotional climax of the act arrived when Evan, feeling secure enough to act independently, nudged Daniel's hand. He used his small, careful fingers to sign a clear, simple message. Thank you. Ariana pressed her hand against her mouth, a profound, silent sob escaping. The simplicity of her son's gratitude, directed at a stranger who understood him, was the most devastating and beautiful moment of her life. She was too overwhelmed by emotion to utter a single sound. As the dinner ended, Ariana, needing to prolong the connection and conversation, led Daniel and the children into the exclusive, private rear garden of the restaurant. It was quiet, softly lit by amber lamps, with the gentle sound of a small fountain providing non-threatening white noise. Evan, feeling entirely safe, held Daniel's hand on one side and Lily's on the other. He walked for the first time in years with a confident, open gait. Ariana's voice was strained, thick with raw vulnerability. Daniel, I have to know. Why does my son trust you instantly? How do I earn that back? Daniel stopped beneath a low-hanging tree, his gaze direct and honest. Because he sees a complete absence of agenda in me, Ariana. He sees safety. He sees someone who moves slowly, talks with his hands, and doesn't try to force him into compliance. What he sees in most adults is pressure. Ariana bowed her head, the weight of her guilt crushing her. After a long pause, Daniel posed the challenge that cut to her core. Ariana, when was the last time you spent time with Evan where the purpose wasn't therapy, education, or exposure? When was the last time the agenda was simply being present? Ariana remained silent, the question an indictment of her life. Daniel continued gently, speaking as a fellow parent. He recalled the terrifying period when Lily had a simple, irrational fear of stepping on cracks in the sidewalk. He hadn't punished her or forced her to walk normally. Instead, he had gotten down and pretended to step over the cracks too, joining her in her reality until she outgrew it. You don't fight the fear, Ariana. You acknowledge it, you sit with it, and you teach them that you are their safe space. You replace the compulsion with patience. Ariana felt her control dissolving entirely. She admitted the deepest, darkest secret of her ambition. I was always forced to be strong. My father was brutal, a cold, distant man who saw vulnerability as a flaw to be punished. I built my empire so Evan would never have to feel weak. I was trying to make him the impenetrable warrior I was forced to become. Daniel touched her arm again, a gentle anchor in the chaos of her self-recrimination. You don't need to force the trauma of your childhood onto him, Ariana. You need to let go of that terrible programming. Ariana finally let go. She collapsed into tears, profound sobs that racked her frame, the first unguarded tears she had shed since becoming CEO. She wept not for her failure, but for the loss of time and connection she could never recover. Evan, ever the seismograph of his mother's emotion, rushed to her side, pulling at her silk blouse. He signed with deep concern. Mommy hurt? Ariana pulled him into a desperate, clinging hug, weeping openly into his hair. Daniel quietly moved away, giving them the essential space for their silent, long-delayed reunion. Twist 1. As Ariana finally calmed, Evan pulled away from his mother's embrace and walked straight back to Daniel, his little hand firmly finding Daniel's finger. He looked up at Daniel, his eyes pleading. He signed slowly and clearly, "Uncle, stay." The use of the word uncle, or a similar honorific suggesting familiarity and kinship, was a profound step. Evan accepting Daniel as a permanent, non-threatening figure. Ariana witnessed the request. It was the moment her heart completely broke and healed in the same breath. Her son was asking a stranger to stay and fill the void she couldn't. She approached Daniel, her composure utterly gone. "Daniel, please," she begged, her voice ragged. "I am begging you. He needs you. I don't know the first step to fix this. Can you teach me how to be a mother? Not a CEO, not an expert, but just a good present mother?" Daniel nodded simply, his face etched with understanding. "Yes, I can, but you must be ready to trade your entire life structure for it. It will be harder than any acquisition you've ever managed." Ariana looked at him with an intense, burning gaze, one of absolute gratitude and desperate hope. Before they left the garden, Ariana pulled out her diamond-encrusted business card once more. Her voice was barely a tremor. "Daniel, I want you to name your price. I will pay you 10 times your former consultant rate. I need you to help Evan." Daniel took the card, looked at the platinum embossing, and then gently folded it in half and placed it back into her hand. "I told you, Ariana, I don't work for money anymore. I only want to see Evan happy. The price is your time, not your wealth." Ariana was paralyzed. Her entire life's philosophy, that every action and relationship had a quantifiable monetary value, was being systematically dismantled. No one, not once, had ever refused her money or her power. Twist 2. Evan, standing beside his mother, noticed her stunned silence and the profound rejection of her currency, money. He saw the naked fear in her eyes as Daniel walked away from the deal. Evan, who saw fear in every crowded room, recognized the unique, unfamiliar terror in his mother's face. He looked at Daniel, then back at his mother, his gaze lingering on the trembling CEO. He raised his small hands and signed the most profound, devastating sentence of the evening, the emotional culmination of the night. "Mom needs you." It was a moment of shocking reversal. The child was comforting and identifying the true need of the parent. Ariana wasn't just crying from guilt. She was weeping because her son saw her, truly saw her, past the billion-dollar shield. He didn't ask her to be strong. He just acknowledged her weakness, making her feel safe for the first time in decades. Ariana burst into uncontrollable tears again, not of shame, but of absolute, overwhelming relief that her son saw her truth. Daniel stepped close, not to embrace her, but simply to stand beside her, a solid, non-intrusive presence. Ariana looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and finally spoke the sentence that signaled her surrender and her hope. "Daniel, I don't just need a teacher for Evan. I need you. Could you permanently step into the life of my son and me?" Ariana executed the next phase with corporate precision, yet with a mother's urgency. She delegated 2 major acquisition deals and cleared her schedule. The following weekend, Daniel and Lily arrived at the Vale Memorial Estate, an immense modernist palace of glass and white marble. Not as guests, but as anchors. Evan, seeing Daniel and Lily, ran out onto the sterile, polished floor and immediately embraced Daniel, clutching his waist. It was a joyful, unreserved display of affection he had never offered to any paid professional. Ariana began her education in earnest. She devoted evenings to studying ASL grammar and developmental psychology texts, filling pristine notebooks with hurried, illegible corporate notes. Her initial attempts at signing were rigid, rushed, and angular, like she was signing a non-disclosure agreement. Daniel gently corrected her. "Slow down, Ariana. Your hands are talking faster than your heart. Stop worrying about perfect syntax. Use your eyes, use your smile. Evan reads your honesty, not your accuracy." Daniel's first phase was to de-sterilize the mansion. He identified immediate sensory issues. The vast, reflective marble floor created painful visual and auditory echoes. The minimalist decor lacked warmth. He introduced small, crucial changes. Auditory grounding. He brought in thick, luxurious area rugs and heavy velvet curtains for the main parlor, immediately absorbing the sterile, cold echoes. Visual comfort. He pointed out how the expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows created a feeling of constant exposure. They covered the lowest third of the glass with simple, frosted film, creating a safe zone and a sense of enclosure. Delegation of chaos. When Ariana's staff resisted the sudden introduction of clutter, toys, books, and colorful blankets, Daniel insisted, Evan needs to see life, not just polish. He needs controlled chaos. Ariana, backing him completely, issued an executive mandate that the children's space was non-negotiable, shocking her lifelong staff into silence. Ariana, meanwhile, had begun making difficult choices at the office. She started refusing late-night calls, stating clearly that time is non-negotiable family time. Her board was confused, but her focus was unwavering. This shift from viewing Evan as a break from work to viewing work as an interruption to Evan was the hardest lesson of all. It was a conscious, painful severing of the identity she had perfected for 20 years. Now when she walked into the mansion, she deliberately left her phone in the study, prioritizing the sound of children's giggles over the chime of an email notification. The hardest part for Ariana was the required slowing of her physical and mental speed. She was used to demanding immediate results. Daniel insisted on a daily, dedicated silent hour, where they simply sat on the floor with Evan and Lily, using low-tech toys like modeling clay or building blocks, forcing Ariana to communicate through touch, expression, and slow, deliberate signs. Evan's progression was stunningly fast. He started seeking out his mother's hand during play. He initiated physical contact. He stopped waking up from night terrors, sleeping soundly through the night, anchored by the consistent, calm energy Daniel brought to the house. Ariana felt a primal joy she never knew existed. She had generated billions in revenue, but seeing Evan laugh freely, unprompted, was the ultimate, priceless dividend. One evening, Daniel cooked a simple, fragrant meal, homemade pesto pasta, a fresh garden salad, and hot milk. It was a messy, simple dinner, entirely lacking in the five-star refinement of La Lumiere. Ariana laughed with genuine delight as Evan, for the first time in memory, ate a full, eager portion without coercion or distraction. Later, as Lily and Evan were outside, giggling as they chased fireflies Daniel had helped them catch, Ariana leaned back on the patio bench, watching the pure magic unfold. She turned to Daniel, her voice soft with realization. I've lived in this 20,000 square foot monument for 7 years, Daniel. I have never once, until tonight, felt that this was a home. Daniel turned to her, the warm light of the mansion spilling onto his kind face. A home isn't a structure, Ariana. It's where your heart breathes freely. It's where your children can laugh without fear. Ariana looked at Daniel for a long, tender moment, her eyes reflecting the unspoken, powerful affection that had deepened between them. She was no longer wearing the cold armor of the CEO. At the close of the weekend, as Daniel was packing his modest bags for their return, Ariana spoke, her voice quieter than ever, terrified of the answer. She asked the question that offered him a permanent space in her heart and her life. Daniel, if I were to ask you and Lily to stay here for good, not as employees but as the foundation of our family, would you be willing to be a part of that? The next 4 weeks sealed their fate. Evan was a new child, stronger, braver, and far less prone to sensory overload. The difference was astronomical. Ariana herself was transformed. She held fewer meetings, smiled more openly, and her daily ritual included a focused half-hour of signing with Evan. She had mastered the complex, heartfelt sign for, "Mommy loves you very much." Daniel and Lily were now completely integrated. The silence of the mansion was gone, replaced by the joyful, messy sounds of childhood play. The four of them had achieved a beautiful, quiet equilibrium. One cool evening, sitting on the newly added cozy porch swing, Ariana confessed to Daniel, her eyes shining with relief. "You did what my entire multi-million-dollar team of experts could not. You gave me back my son," Daniel gently corrected her, his humility a defining feature of his character. It wasn't my skill, Ariana. It was Evan's mother, who learned to trade her drive for patience. You are the one who rebuilt the connection. Ariana looked at Daniel, her eyes communicating everything she struggled to articulate. Her love, her gratitude, her need. She was about to speak the words that would define their future. But Evan, ever the quiet, perceptive heart of their new family, interrupted them. He ran up to Daniel, reaching out for a hug. He looked into Daniel's eyes, then back at his mother's, and slowly, deliberately, formed a single powerful sign. "Daddy," Ariana gasped, covering her mouth as deep, cleansing tears of pure joy streamed down her face. It was the word, the acknowledgement she had never dared to pray for. Daniel embraced Evan tightly. Ariana placed her hand firmly and possessively over Daniel's arm, completing the sacred circle. Lily ran over and burrowed into the center of the embrace. The three adults watched the two children run off again, chasing the final glimmers of sunset across the lawn. Ariana leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, her voice soft but absolute. "You didn't just save Evan, Daniel," she whispered. "You saved me. You gave me the life I should have built all along." Daniel and Ariana walked slowly across the expansive lawn, their hands firmly clasped. The children raced ahead, two sets of small, happy figures in the fading light. The formidable billionaire CEO and the kind, humble single dad, their lives once defined by the chasm of class and ambition, were now walking side by side. The final, most important piece of a family she never knew she needed had clicked perfectly into place. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe.